Testing to see if the mic works. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, take up a lament concerning the king of Tyre and say to him, this is what the sovereign Lord says. You were a seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you, carnelian, chrysolite, and emerald, topaz, onyx, and jasper, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and beryl. Your settings and mountings were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in your ways, from the day you were created, till wickedness was found in you. Ezekiel 28, 11-15. At this point in time in the scriptures, God is speaking to the king of Tyre, who was once a friend of Israel, as we can see in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 11, has now committed egregious sins against God. But it wasn't always like this for Tyre. Tyre was once friends to the Israelites, and now they've become great enemies against Israel. Chapters 26 and 27 both revolve around the idea of God judging the land of Tyre. He planned to destroy them for everything that they did. In fact, in the previous two chapters, in chapter 26 and 27, we see that God is speaking to the land of Tyre. But in chapter 28, he's actually speaking to the king himself. The king of Tyre was told at one point that he was the seal of perfection. He was in the Garden of Eden. He was the one adorned with all these precious stones, and he was anointed by God as the guardian cherub. He was blameless. It was a strange thing for God to speak to a king here on earth regarding something in the Garden of Eden. At no point do we see anyone else besides Adam and Eve in the garden. So if that was the case, we would have known about a third person there, yet we don't find anybody there. And if there was a third person in the Garden of Eden, it certainly wasn't going to be the king of Tyre. Well, if that's the case, who was God actually speaking to during this time? The person God was speaking to was Satan. The only other being that we're introduced to in the Garden of Eden account is Satan. There was Adam, Eve, and the serpent, which was a representative of Satan. And at this point in time in Ezekiel, it's probably the most detailed version of Satan that we ever get to hear about. We see that he was an angel. One of the greatest roles in heaven was anointed onto this man, well, this angel. And though he was the greatest, because of his pride, because of his greed, because of his selfishness, he was cast out of the heavens. And whenever I hear of Satan's fall, I can't help but laugh. But not out of a humorous kind of way, but because I was embarrassed for the guy. And it's the same kind of laughing that I do whenever I see Israel fail God in the Old Testament over and over and over again. And I can't help but think of how big of an idiot the Israelites are until I see my own mistakes imitate the Israelites. I start to see why the scriptures are written for me. I start to see why the Old Testament is important for me to read. It says it in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the accumulation of the ages has come. The Old Testament wasn't written as a joke for me to laugh at or to feel bad about or embarrassed about. It was more of a warning for me. It was for me to see that I can't be doing what the Israelites are doing in this point in time, or else I'll be receiving the same kind of punishments that the Israelites got at this point in time. Back to the topic at hand. If the Old Testament was written for the sake of an example, what does Ezekiel 28, 11-15 talk about for me? Well, you just keep reading and you figure it out. Through your widespread trade, you were filled with violence and you sinned. So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God, and I expelled you, guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to the earth. I made a spectacle of you before your kings. By your many sins and dishonest trade, you have desecrated your sanctuaries. So I made a fire come out from you, and it consumed you, and I reduced you to ashes on the ground, in the sight of all who were watching. All the nations who knew you are appalled at you. You have come to a horrible end and will be no more. Ezekiel 28, 16 to 19. Satan's prize for playing the games that he played with God was that he was to be driven in disgrace from the heavens, that he was expelled for all the world to be seen, to be made a spectacle. So if the Old Testament was written to teach me an example of how I should live, if there's anything I should take away from this scripture, if I play Satan games, I will win Satan prizes.